So let's get started and talk a little bit about what a fascinating world it is, the world of gems and jewelry. And I'm going to give you a few hints and tips along the way for if you are going to buy jewelry in the near future, or even just when you go home and you're going to go and look into your boxes, your jewelry boxes, to see what's inside. So one of the fascinating things that is amazing is that there are so many different gems available to us today. We have around about 4,800 minerals available to us. These are species, different species, and many of them come in the same color as one another because we don't have that many different colors. And so this is one of the reasons why you can never tell a gemstone by its color. Also, we have to understand more about the actual material itself. We understand that every mineral species has a chemical composition and a crystal structure, and that can't be seen. That's why we need the gemological equipment, because the only way to identify then is to do that kind of testing and to understand what chemical composition and crystal structure the material is. Once we know that, then we can seriously identify it. So when we talk a little bit about the names of gems, everyone's heard of emerald and ruby and sapphire and pearl. We talk about it normally in the industry as species and variety. And it's a little bit like naming, you know, we have families, and our family, we have family names, and then we also have our given name. And I like to think of it like that, although it's not really quite that way, but I like to think of it as a species is like the family name, and from that family, everyone has the same chemical composition and crystal structure. And then within a family, you can have lots of different family members, and they're all going to have different names because they all look different. And so that's how I think of the varieties of gems. Because they look different, either they have different coloring, or maybe they have some kind of phenomena, or maybe different opacity. So what happens is that we get varieties within species. Now, many people know variety names, so you might already know emerald and ruby and sapphire. Those are all variety names. Some people don't know the species name. And the species name is the one that really helps us when it boils down to chemical composition and crystal structure. Because what we need to understand is that all the varieties within a species are going to have the same chemical composition and crystal structure. So let's take an example with one species called quartz, which is very, very common. In fact, it can be found pretty much all over the world. And you probably heard of quartz, they're so common. So what are all the different varieties? They have about 28 or more varieties of quartz, depending on, as I said, color or opacity and things of that nature. The one that you probably recognize the most would be amethyst, which is typically purple. Or what about citrine, which is typically a yellow to orange color. We've got rock crystal quartz, which is colorless. Tiger's eye quartz, which is also quite popular and very inexpensive. And then we've got aventurine quartz, which is always mistaken for jade, and smoky quartz, and many, many more. So with all these different varieties falling into the same species, when we test any of these stones, they usually have the same general properties. And this is something just to bear in mind, because we don't always hear about the species name. We typically hear about variety names. So when it comes to ruby and sapphire, they are also like brother and sister in the same family, which is the corundum family, which is a corundum species. And we'll take a closer look at all of those. But there are, as I said, many, many species, more than 100 species today that are considered gem quality and that we use very frequently in jewelry. So let's talk about some of the factors that affect the value of gems before we go any further. I know that you know them. You probably heard of them before. It is color and clarity and cut and carat weight. But one of the things that many people don't realize is that colored stones and diamonds are a little different. When we think of colored stones, we are looking for the top feature is color. Color is the primary thing that, or should be the primary thing that you are looking for. When we look at a diamond or are looking to buy a diamond, then color is not the most important feature. In fact, we are looking for lack of color, which is entirely different. And so color is not the most important of the 4 C's for diamond. So if we want to understand color, first of all, is there any difference between different colors within a species? So here you see the variety of sapphire, which is from the species corundum. And I've only put a few here for you to look at. I haven't put by any means all of them, but you can see that the sapphire comes in all of these different colors. Yellow sapphire, pink sapphire, purple sapphire, green sapphire, of which the most popular is the blue. So every different color can command a different price, and the ones that are more popular are definitely going to command the higher price. So for example, within this variety of sapphire, and definitely the blue sapphire tends to command a higher price. Why? Because more people like blue sapphire, more people look for blue sapphire. In fact, there's a lot of people still today that don't realize that sapphire comes in a lot more colors. But what about if we look at another family member? We look at ruby. Ruby is also from corundum, so it has the same chemical composition and crystal structure as all of the sapphires. There is one distinct difference, and you might wonder, why is it that if they are the same, why is it that we use the color in front of the word sapphire for all of the others, and for the red variety we have a separate name, ruby? Well, in part it's got to do with the history, because ruby goes way back in history, but there is something else very important that we understand about ruby, and that the color of ruby is actually coming from elements that the others don't have. It's coming from the element chromium. So these are typically very minute impurities that cause coloring in different gemstones. And the fact that it has chromium, which is much, much more rare, and therefore also makes the material much more rare as well, is what causes ruby to command a much higher price. Most of the other colored sapphires are being colored usually by iron and titanium. Yes. And there is one more that has a special variety name all of its own. You may have heard of it. It is called the Padparacha. And Padparacha is generally a very exceptional mixture of orange and pink together. And these have become very popular in the last 10, 20 years. Before that, we didn't really hear very much about them, but the Padparacha now commands quite a high price. Not quite as high as ruby, but definitely higher than some of the other colors of sapphires. And Padparacha typically comes from Sri Lanka, and some very beautiful ones have been found there. And the name Padparacha, which is a very strange name, is actually coming from a flower, which is typically found in Sri Lanka. So, yes, we can look at the different colors and say that different colors can cause different pricings, but we can also be more specific than that. And when we look at the hue, and that's just another word for color, we want to look at the small nuances in the hue. So for example, if I just take blue sapphire, because everybody loves blue sapphire, it's very popular. Let's look at a blue sapphire. Here we have a very beautiful blue. Some people might refer to this as a pure blue. Then we also have a violetish blue. Now, violetish blue, it's blue still, but it's just got a little hint of violet mixed in with the blue. And then I could also have a greenish blue. So these are very viable options that can be found pretty well anywhere. And when we look at the three together, as you can see on this slide, the question is, which one do you like the most? At the end of the day, when you're buying a gem, it should be personal preference. It should be the color that really speaks to you, or the color that you feel, makes you happy. And if it's the plain or pure blue that you love, then you should buy that one. If it is the greenish blue, then by all means buy that one. But please also understand that some of these nuances can make a difference in price. And typically, the little hint of violetish in the blue would raise the price of your sapphire. The little hint of greenish in your blue actually lowers the value. And so the pure blue would be kind of in between those two. Another feature in color is tone. That's our second feature, which I would like to highlight to you. And tone basically indicates how light or how dark the gemstone is. Now, typically the best is to have a medium tone, which means it's not very light and it's not very dark. And again, here on the screen, you will see a couple of examples. We have the one on the left-hand side. This is a medium tone. And then the one on the right-hand side is a dark tone. Luckily, it's not so dark. The dark tone, you can still see the color of the gem, which is red. Now, both of these gems look red. And let's say they were corundum, then both of them would qualify as ruby. But one of them is definitely more valuable than the other due to the tone. The medium tone shows more red. The darker tone, you can see there are some areas of extinction. And when we say extinction, that just means that they're so dark that we no longer are able to see the color in the gem. Now, this is very, very common to have gemstones that are a very dark tone. And again, I'm going to refer back to sapphire because I've seen so many people come to me with very nice sapphires that they've brought when they go, overseas, they're traveling, maybe they go to different countries. But the thing is, typically I see them very, very dark. And the darker your gemstone is, the less valuable it is. Yes, it is true to say it's better to buy a dark blue sapphire than a light blue sapphire. Again, the light blue doesn't retain as much value as the medium tone. But when dark gets so dark that you just can't see the color blue anymore, if you have to pick up a pen light and shine a pen light through that material to be able to see what color it is, then obviously that is not a good quality gemstone. So really the best is to focus on what we call medium tone, which is neither too dark nor too light. Now, is that easy to do? Well, no, not all gems are going to come out of the ground, that perfect medium tone. In fact, there's lots of gems that are either too dark or too light. But that's what you need to just keep in mind when you are buying, because lots of people will want to show you the very, very dark ones and tell you, oh, there's deep, deep, rich color. But it's going to be up to you to look for the color that really stands out and that you can see clearly without being modified by black or white. So if we look at the slide again, if I bring up a light tone in the same color, so these were two red stones initially, now I've added a third, but the third one is now looking pink. So please remember that tone is adding either black or white, and when we take red and we add white to it, it modifies the color to what we know as pink. Now, does pink qualify as ruby? Generally not. Typically, ruby qualifies having a medium to dark tone. So be careful. Again, people will try to show you slightly lighter gems, and then it would be better known as a pink sapphire. Remember, they're all in the same family, rather than a ruby. So for the next slide, we're going to talk about saturation. And saturation is the vividness, the intensity, and also the purity of color. So we want our gemstones to be vibrant, to have this amazing color jumping out at you, calling out to you. There are plenty of gems in the world that are either, well, when we say desaturated, what that means is that the amount of color is just not there. It's weaker, or it's diluted, or it could be possibly modified by either brown or gray. Now, if you know a color wheel and if you know a little bit of color theory, on one side of the color wheel we have the warm colors, and on the other side we have the cool colors. And very typically the warm colors tend to desaturate to a brown, and the cool colors tend to desaturate to a gray. And this is happening with many, many gems. So you can see that they've got a little bit of color, but there's a lot of grayish there, or there's a lot of brownish. Those tend to be desaturated. So we want to stay away from brown, away from gray, and we want to be able to see pure color and vibrant color. And that is the key to saturation. And saturation is ever so important, and it's something that you really want to take a look at in your gems. Great, so if we think of all three of those factors, they would be probably, I would say, the most important for you to look at if you're looking for colored stones. And there's one more that we could add to that list, and that is distribution of color. Again, we want color to be evenly distributed throughout the material. If you look at, for example, jade, we all think of the jade as being beautiful green material. Actually, jadeite comes in other colors as well, but we want it to be a nice even coloring, not with the white speckles or black speckles. We want it to be smooth and even. So the same thing with the transparent faceted gems too. Okay, now what if we take a look at diamonds a moment? If we take a look at diamonds, then diamonds are totally different when we come to color, because we said that we're looking for lack of color in diamonds. And here you will see a very recognized diamond color scale. In fact, this particular scale was invented by the GIA, which is the Gemological Institute of America, which has been around since around the 1930s. And this scale they invented at that time, and they invented it because there were many, many scales on the market by then. In fact, diamonds have been around since about 1000 to 800 BCE. And there were many, many scales that were invented with sometimes letters, sometimes numbers, sometimes interesting words that were associated with the colors. But there were plenty that started with A, and then somebody came up with a double A, and then somebody else came up with a triple A. So when GIA decided to create their own color system, they really wanted to stay away from A because it was a bit too confusing at that time already. And they said, let's start with D for devoid of color, which means that the diamonds that are D color have no color. They are devoid of color. And then as we go down the scale to the E, the F, the G, the H, the I, well, just in general, we are getting very slight grades of either yellowish, brownish, or grayish that will be more noticeable as you go down the scale. Now that scale is divided into about 4 sections. You will see that one section is D to F, another section is G to J, and the last section is K to R, and then S to Z. So when it comes to D to F, this is what we call the colorless section. And if you were looking at a diamond with your naked eye, there is absolutely no way to determine the difference between a D, an E, or an F for sure. So when you go out to buy a diamond, do we really need to get a D color? D is the best, it's the highest grade, and it is therefore commanding an absolute premium. It's going to be much more expensive than the other letters. If you can't see the difference between a D, an E, and an F, is it necessary to buy a D? So in my opinion, it's actually quite useful to know that you don't really need to buy a D color diamond, although it's very popular here in Asia and so many people want the D and the VVS. Great, but if you were to compromise just a little bit and get an E or even an F, then with that little bit of compromise in color, you can actually get a bigger diamond for the same price. If you were to go down to a G, an H, an I, or a J, again, that little group is grouped together because they pretty much look the same. And especially if you are going to maybe set your stones in yellow metal, if you liked yellow gold and you have a preference for yellow gold, then it would be fine to have a G, an H, or an I. And again, it's not going to be that visible. So consider that, because you can end up with a larger size diamond. So for clarity grading of colored stones, it's a lot more complex because diamond is one material, but colored stones, we have many, many, many different species. And so there are lots of different systems worldwide to grade. But what we do have to keep in mind when we grade is that certain gems should be separated from others in the grading. And why should they be separated? Because some typically are available very commonly without many inclusions, and some come automatically included and very difficult to find them with no inclusions. I'll give you some examples. So what if we talk about topaz? Topaz is a beautiful gem. It typically comes in very large sizes and small as well, but it can come in very large size, and it typically comes very, very clean. That means quite free from inclusions, and if you pick up a topaz and you can't see anything with your naked eye, it wouldn't be surprising. If you were to pick up your loupe and try to look with your loupe and still didn't see anything, it wouldn't be surprising. On the other hand, if we look at, say, a ruby or a sapphire, they are typically included, but the color often masks what's inside the stone. So when you look with your naked eye, you probably won't notice much, but the minute you pick up a loupe and that 10-power magnification, you'll be able to see something inside. So that's a very different category. And we can't judge those two in the same category because it wouldn't be very fair. And then we have a further category, which is for the emerald. Now, those of you who know emerald, you know that emerald is pretty much always included. We call it the jardin, the garden in the stone. And it's very, very normal for emeralds to have many fractures, inclusions, etc. To find a large size, absolutely clean emerald, it's going to be either in a museum or it's just an absolute rarity. So again, we have to consider the three different categories normally when we are clarity grading colored stones. So it makes it a little bit more challenging. Okay, now let's talk about clarity. And if we talk a little bit about clarity in diamonds, well, we have two types of things that we look for. We look for internal and external characteristics. The internal characteristics, we do not like to call them flaws or imperfections. You hear a lot of people, using that kind of terminology. But gemologically speaking, we prefer to use the word inclusions, because sometimes inclusions can be even valuable. And how can inclusions be valuable? Well, you don't want to buy a diamond where you can actually see the inclusions with your naked eye. But if you have some, even small inclusions that when you look with your loupe, you can recognize your diamond, because remember that every gem is absolutely unique as you and I. They all have their fingerprints, like we have our fingerprints, and we can actually tell which that gem is by its fingerprints. So if you get to know your diamond, and if you get to look at the characteristics that it has in it, then nobody could ever switch your diamond for another, or for another gemstone, because you would know what you're looking for. So that's one benefit. The other benefit with inclusions today, I'm sure you know there are lots of synthetics on the market, and again, if you have some natural inclusions in the material, if you know how to look for them and you have the right equipment, then again, this could be very helpful. Gemologically speaking, we like inclusions, we like to find them because that helps us definitely in our assessment of natural versus synthetic. Now, with diamond grading, all diamond grading is typically done with 10 power magnification. And usually we use a loop because a loop is a standard 10 power magnification. Of course, you can buy a 20 power, a 30 power loop. You can even today buy loops that are even higher power. But in general, the industry likes a standard which is 10 power. And if we were all to use that same standard, then we could all, you know, look and grade kind of at the same level, which is important. So typically diamonds are all graded at 10 power magnification. And there are lots of different clarity grading systems. Again, I could go over all the different systems there are, but it would take a very long time because there are so many. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight to you one of the more popular ones, which is the GIA system. And in that system there are 11 categories. And the first category we can look at would be flawless. And then, of course, they also have internally flawless. What is the difference between flawless and internally flawless? Well, flawless means that you're not going to see anything in or on the outside of the gem, and that is at 10 power magnification. So this is very important where the 10 power magnification comes in. Internally flawless will simply mean that nothing is found inside with the 10 power magnification, but maybe something is found on the outside. Some little tiny blemish is what we call the outer things that we might find. And it could be a little scratch, it could be a bit of abrasion, it could be, you know, certain features that we find literally on the outside of the gem. Now, when people buy a flawless diamond, yes, they typically have a certificate that comes with it, and it says flawless, and they believe that it is flawless, and everyone believes it's flawless. I just want to highlight that that flawless means flawless under 10 power magnification. So if I were to take a flawless diamond and zoom it up under a microscope, and I would zoom it up to a very high power, well, yes, I might actually find something in a flawless diamond. So 10 power magnification, important. Next we have the categories VVS 1 and VVS 2. So this VVS category simply means very, very slightly included. And that is very, very difficult, even for the trained professional with the loop, which is the 10 power magnification, to be able to find something in the diamond. Yes, the professional will do it. It will take some time to rock and tilt the stone and really, you know, look as much as they can to make sure that they're not making a mistake. But it means that what's inside is very, very small. Now, if you look at the slide that's on the screen, you notice there are two tiny little markings on the diamond that is there. Would you see these markings on a VVS, either VVS 1 or VVS 2? The answer is no, not at all. Not with your naked eye for sure. And even if most people were to pick up a loop and have a look with a loop, without the right training, you are not going to find those two little markings in there. So you might ask me, why are they so evident on this slide? Well, the reason they're so evident on this slide is because the size of the diamond on this slide is huge. So if you think about it and you collapse down that diamond to a size which is more reasonable, let's say we even collapsed it down to a 1 carat size, then you have to remember that those little tiny markings also are becoming more and more diminutive, and therefore you will not see them in the VVS 1 or VVS 2, definitely not without a loop, and even with a loop it's a struggle. So the next category is the VS1 and the VS2. Nothing wrong with this category. It simply means very slightly included. So the inclusions in this category would be a little bit bigger. But again, if I were to give you a loop, and if you're not used to looking through a loop, you are not likely to see those tiny little marks, these little inclusions inside. Even this can take a little bit of time to look for. Of course, a trained professional will find these much faster than in the VVS varieties. So VS simply means very slightly included. Now, this is a very decent one to buy. And if again, my personal opinion, if I'm going out to buy a diamond, then I would probably also compromise here, and instead of getting a flawless, or instead of getting a VVS1 or a VVS2, I would be perfectly contented with a VS1 or even a VS2 for that matter. And again, if you are compromising, then you end up with the possibility of buying for the same budget a larger diamond. Yes. Okay, next category is the SI1 and the SI2. This is slightly included. And again, these are just one little bit more than the other noticeable. We would say that these kinds of inclusion with 10-power magnification are noticeable. So that means that when you pick up your loop, would you be likely to see these? The answer is yes, you probably would see them. Yes. They're not that obvious, but they're there. And finally, we have one more category, which is the I category, and this is divided into I1, I2, and I3. And so I means not included, not imperfect, as many people think, but included. And this is still what we consider gem quality. So when you look at that scale, all the way down to I3 is still gem quality. Beyond that, we have bought, which is basically not so great. It's ground up and used for industrial purposes. Now, sometimes I joke about I1, I2, and I3. Just for the fun of it, I will tell you what I say. There are some inclusions in diamonds that are not dangerous, and they're just ugly. Ugly because if you can see them very clearly, you know, people think that is ugly in a diamond. But they're not dangerous. They will just be there. They're not going to expand. They're not going to cause any difficulty within your stone. There are some inclusions that could be dangerous in the sense that if you're looking at, for example, a feather, which could be a small fracture inside the material, and if you were to knock your diamond, then that fracture could actually extend. This is possible. Now, it's one of the most common features in diamonds, so it's not that we say, oh, we don't want to buy diamonds with feathers, because most diamonds can have feathers. But that's a little bit more dangerous than, say, just another included crystal that is inside the diamond. So an I1 is considered ugly, an I2 is considered dangerous, and an I3 has the two. It's considered both ugly and dangerous. So that's just a little joke, but it's kind of a fun joke to remember. Not that that would make any difference here, because very few people here in Asia are ever buying I1, I2, and I3. So you're probably going to stick with slightly higher grades of clarity. And then we want to talk a little bit about the carat weight. Just a touch on carat weight. It's been around a long time. Of course, back when they discovered diamonds the first time, they used to have balances, and they used to use a carob seed, which had these tiny fine little seeds that you see on the slide here. They were very small, and they were very even in size and weight. And so on the balance, on one side they would put the diamond, on the other side they would put the little carob seeds, and that's how they were able to weigh. But of course, since 1913, we've had the metric system, and so now everything is pretty much metric. So 1 carat is equal to 0.2 of a gram. So if you're cooking, you probably know what a gram is. It's a very, very light weight. So for us, 1 gram is about 5 carats. So that hopefully puts it into a little bit more context. We also talk about points, which is important. If I have a stone, or it could be a colored stone or a diamond that is quite small, let's say it was under a carat, then I might refer to it as being a 50 point or a 60 point stone. This you have to think a little bit like, compare it to money. We have 100 cents in a dollar, and we have 100 points in a carat. So if you look at it like that, then it becomes very simple. So if I say that I've got a 50 point diamond, it's going to be a half a carat. If I've got a 75 point diamond, it's 3/4 of a carat. So that's how we use the points. And typically, if it's diamonds, remember we said that the price goes up. It's an exponential curve with size. And then with colored stones, it can be with many, many colored stones, but there are some that just do happen to get to such large sizes that it is possible that it levels off, and then price per carat even starts to drop. Let's now take a look at the shapes and the cutting styles. Typically, we try to get the maximum weight retention from the rough. And that's because a lot of gem material is costly. You know, it's valuable. It's difficult to mine sometimes, and the mining is it can be dangerous in many cases. And so, throughout history, people have always tried to retain that maximum weight. Nowadays, we realize with certain gemstones that you want to cut for beauty and not just to get the maximum from the weight. But if you look at the diamond as an example, and here we've got a very good example on the slide, that the diamond comes and it forms in the earth in the shape of an octahedron. Octahedron simply means octa is 8, hedron is faces. So when you get the diamonds that are coming from deep in the earth, you will find that they have 8 sides to them. Little shape which is like 2 pyramids with their bases attached. And in order to maximize the weight from these kind of shapes, then what we do, we can actually slice it, and we can get 2 separate stones from one piece of rough. And that way we get one bigger stone and also one smaller stone. And it is also one of the reasons why the majority of diamonds are typically round, because this particular shape will generate more round stones if you're maximizing the weight. If we do get different shapes, you know, the fancy shapes, then those fancy shapes very frequently form from distorted rough more than from the octahedrons. Then what about other colored stones? Colored stones can come in many shapes and sizes. Let's face it, today we can cut a colored gemstone into the portrait of your cat or dog, if you like, because we have laser technology, everything is possible. But in general, many of the crystals grow in different forms and different formats, and therefore when they grow longer, we tend to see the other shapes typically, like the ovals or the navettes, pear shapes, etc. So that's the main difference, is why we see a lot more rounds for diamonds, and we do see a lot more variety with colored stones. But if you are buying a diamond, cut is absolutely critical, because the more beautiful, the better that diamond is cut, the more beautiful your diamond will be, the more light return you're going to get from the diamond. And this is something that in the last 10-20 years has been really very much brought to the forefront. So diamonds today, when they're cut to really precision cutting in every way. You know, mainly it takes almost 3 days to cut a 1 carat good quality diamond. So what is it about this slide? People look at this slide and they see the numbers and the percentages and the angles and all of this stuff, and they, oh my gosh, do I need to go and memorize these numbers and angles and percentages? And the answer is absolutely not. There is no need. If you're cutting a diamond, then this is useful, and it's good to have be within certain angles and proportions. But when you go to buy, you just need to have the right terminology, right? Because when diamonds are cut, they're typically cut into maybe 5 different ways, from poor to fair to good to very good and excellent. So if you're looking to buy a diamond, this is the one place we don't have any compromise whatsoever. We want an excellent cut diamond, because if you buy an excellent cut, it'll be the most beautiful you can buy. And here's an example of what happens. If we have a well-proportioned diamond, all the light, every little drop of light that goes in to the diamond will refract, and it'll just bounce around inside the stone, and it'll come back out through the top portion of the stone, either through the crown or through the table. And when we see all of that coming back, the light coming through the table is giving us the brilliance, and the light from all the way around the table and from the crown area is giving us what we call dispersion, which is where the white light is broken down to all the spectral hues. So really that's what we look for in a diamond. There isn't anything else. It's the brilliance and the dispersion, because after all, we're not looking for color in most diamonds. If on the other hand we have a poorly cut diamond, let's say it was very deep, you can see here how a lot of light actually, it leaks out through the bottom, the pavilion of the stone. And as that light leaks out from the bottom, is not returning back to your eye, and therefore you're not seeing such a brilliant or dispersive stone. On the other hand, if you have a shallow, also the same thing is going to happen. You're going to get scattering of light, you're going to get some loss from the bottom, is not going to come out in the right way, and even a shallow stone is not necessarily going to be beautiful. They can even have circles inside, which are reflections of the girdle, because the pavilion is too shallow. When it comes to colored stones, well, we want to make sure that the color is improved. Now, if that means that I need to make it a little deeper to retain more color, then so be it. Or if I need to make it shallower so that it's not as dark, then so be it. So we've got a lot of tolerance with colored stones that we have zero tolerance with diamonds. I really hope you enjoyed this short basic session. And there's really so much more to gems and jewelry and learning about gemology. So I think that if you're a collector, it is something that will help you in your future purchases. If you are in the industry and working with customers, it'll help you to communicate better with those customers. And hopefully if you're a jewelry designer, then knowing a little bit more about the materials you're working with is always very valuable.